This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
This is The World Today, bringing you the latest developments from around the world. I am Penina Karibe. Coming up, Russia presents a review of its diplomacy in 2021 amid rising tensions with the West. The Democratic People's Republic of Korea launches its third suspected missile in 2 weeks. And Mali citizens to join major protests this afternoon against ECOWAS sanctions as the UN calls on military junta to release election timetable. Russia has held an annual review of its diplomatic successes and challenges in 2021. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov hosted the press conference against a backdrop of increasing tensions with the West. The conference follows Tuesday's security talks between the US and Russia. Lavrov says Russia was not ready to wait for the US and NATO to respond to its security demands and needs a detailed written response to every Russian proposal. He added that President Vladimir Putin could take decision once Moscow had received a point-by-point response to its proposals and counter-proposals from the West. For more, Stuart Smith joins us live from Moscow.
He's speaking after a very high-level negotiation taking place over this week. 3 meetings, one with the US, one with the Western NATO military alliance, and one with the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, all to try to find agreement on Russia's 3 big demands: that the United States remove nuclear weapons from Europe, that NATO allies stop deploying troops and holding military exercises in Eastern Europe, and also a guarantee that Ukraine and other post-Soviet states do not join Europe. That, after Thursday's meeting at the OSCE, seemed to indicate there was no room left, no more road to go down in terms of negotiations. No breakthroughs have taken place, but we heard from the Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov today, just now, he's still speaking at a press conference, that he says they are waiting the West's response. No decision has been made. Russia is waiting for written proposals, written responses from the West. And notably, Sergei Lavrov said today, despite there being discussions with NATO allies, the OSCE group of countries, really what they're looking for is the United States to lead this. He says it has to be guarantees from the United States that Russia will mostly listen to. However, he says they will not wait forever in Russia for a response. And if there isn't a response, he didn't outline exactly what would happen, but pointed journalists to President Vladimir Putin's comments from a previous press conference where he said that Russia's response will depend on exactly the problems the West has with Russia's proposals, and they will be decided in conjunction with the Russian military. Yes, Sergei Lavrov here not just talking about Ukraine and NATO, but summing up a whole year of Russian foreign affairs. To pick out a few, he was keen to emphasize the need for strategic stability. That refers to nuclear weapons, and he hailed an agreement amongst the United Nations Security Council about this, a new agreement lately, emphasizing that a nuclear war helps nobody in the world, nobody wins a nuclear war, and new agreements and obligations on nuclear powers to prevent nuclear war from happening. He also emphasized Russian President Vladimir Putin's request for a meeting of the United Nations Security Council members in person sometime, an agenda and timeline still to be decided there. He talked about developing relations in Asia through the various different blocks, such as, for example, the Shanghai Cooperation Agreement, the ASEAN countries looking towards the Indo-Pacific. Russia, he says, has a number of strategic partnerships there, and he hailed a year of successful discussions and meetings around the 20 years treaty on good neighborliness and friendship with China. And finally, he noted with regard to the coronavirus pandemic, Russia is pleased to have made a contribution to the global community with the development and dispersal of its Sputnik V coronavirus vaccine, now in use in 70 countries. And he emphasized once again the need for mutual recognition of vaccine certificates. Sputnik V in particular not recognized by nearly any Western countries. Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister in Russia, would like to see that change.
Stuart Smith in Moscow, thank you for that. Now, following recent large-scale and violent protests in Kazakhstan, the Collective Security Treaty Organization peacekeeping troops are returning to Russia. Kazakh President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev has vowed to present a new package of political reforms. Earlier, we talked to Frederick Emmerich, assistant professor at Kimep University. Take a listen.
We still have a state of emergency and curfew in force until the 19th of January, but traffic is picking up in the city. Stores are open limited hours. That's groceries and freestanding stores, some markets. I'm not sure about shopping centers yet, and still liquor sales are banned for the period of the emergency. International flights have resumed somewhat, although I understand still for the state of emergency that foreigners are either not allowed or greatly restricted in their ability to enter. The main square where most of the activities took place over the past week or so is now open. People can go there. The exchange rate has improved a little bit here over the past few days. There is still a visible military and police presence, but not as great as I might have predicted. Another big thing is Omicron has appeared. Despite the fact that things are stabilizing here, we're reminded that things weren't normal before that. And so when universities and schools resume over the next week or two, they'll be having online education until at least the 6th of February. So that's where we are now.
South Korea's military says the DPRK has just fired an unidentified projectile into the sea off its east coast. Japan's Coast Guard says the projectile could be a ballistic missile. This is the third such launch this month. Our correspondent Jack Barton has more.
The Joint Chiefs of Staff announced this, and when they do, it means it's a weapon of significance. They don't normally announce these tests unless it's something like a ballistic missile, so that is likely what it turns out to be. It comes, of course, just shortly after a statement by the DPRK's foreign ministry that there would be, in their words, a stronger and certain reaction to the sanctions imposed by the United States on 6 DPRK individuals. They are linked to the development of the DPRK's nuclear and missile programs. And all of this, following this, what the DPRK is calling a hypersonic missile test, this being the third test in actually just over a week. So a cluster of tests here that have caused a lot of alarm in South Korea, but the response here is still a muted one. President Moon Jae-in has ordered his officials to try and find ways to decrease the tensions, to try and bring the tensions down at the moment, to try and revive talks. But those talks seem a long way away. The DPRK seems to be pressing ahead with what Kim Jong-un the other day described as a sort of a strengthening of the strategic military muscle in terms of quality and quantity. Those were his words as he oversaw what they said was the final test. But really, I think the response is aimed at Washington. So what the DPRK wants to see is sort of a response that it likes from Washington, but probably unlikely, as unlikely that it's going to see that as Washington is going to see an about-face in Pyongyang.
The United Nations is urging Mali's ruling junta to announce an election timetable amid anger over its decision to delay elections. UN Chief Antonio Guterres says this could improve relations between Mali and the international community, in particular the West African bloc ECOWAS. In a sharp escalation after months of diplomatic tensions, ECOWAS last week agreed to shatter borders with the Sahel state and impose a trade embargo. The move came after Mali's junta proposed to stay in power for up to 5 years before staging elections. This is against international demands to respect a promise to hold elections on the 27th of February. EU defense ministers have also announced that they will be falling in line with the ECOWAS sanctions to pile more pressure on the Mali military leaders.
ECOWAS decision establishing that if Malian government presents an acceptable timeline and takes steps in that direction, then there will be gradual lifting of sanctions. And of course, I'm working with ECOWAS and the African Union to create conditions which can allow the government of Mali to adopt a reasonable and acceptable position to accelerate a transition which has already been underway for a long time.
Meanwhile, Sweden has announced its decision to withdraw its troops this year from a European Special Forces mission to the Sahel region in Mali. Australian authorities have cancelled Novak Djokovic's visa for a second time. They say the world tennis #1 may pose a risk to the community because he is not vaccinated for COVID-19. Greg Navarro reports from Sydney.
Alex Hawke released a statement after cancelling Novak Djokovic's visa for a second time, saying, "In making this decision, I carefully considered information provided to me by the Department of Home Affairs, the Australian Border Force and Mr. Djokovic. The Morrison government," that refers to the Prime Minister of Australia, "is firmly committed to protecting Australia's borders, particularly in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic." So you're absolutely right. The minister used these broad ministerial powers under the public health concern, I guess, mode of all this to, as you said, cancel Novak Djokovic's visa for a second time. You may remember this all backed up just a few weeks ago when Novak Djokovic came to Australia, applied for a medical exemption under the rules afforded to him by Tennis Australia and the Victorian state government. He was given a medical exemption because he is not vaccinated. And remember, anybody coming to Australia, particularly for the Australian Open, has to be fully vaccinated. The reason he was provided and received that medical exemption is because he's had COVID-19 recently. However, though, when the Australian government got wind of that, they quickly canceled it. And Novak Djokovic was brought into a room, quickly interviewed, quickly interrogated about all this, not given, according to a federal circuit court judge, enough time to react to the cancellation, contact his lawyers and whatnot. So the judge basically canceled the cancellation of his visa.
Data from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services shows that 19 states have less than 15% remaining capacity in their ICUs. 4 of them have less than 10%. That is largely due to the rapidly spreading Omicron variant. Data from Johns Hopkins University shows the U.S. averaged more than 770,000 new COVID-19 cases daily over the past week. That is more than 3 times that of last winter's peak average and more than 4.5 times the peak from the Delta-driven surge. As of Wednesday, the number of people hospitalized in the U.S. with COVID-19 has reached a record high of 151,000. National Guard personnel and other federal emergency teams have been sent to hospitals and long-term care facilities to ease burdens caused by shortage of healthcare staff. And that's it for this edition of The World Today. I'll be back shortly with more news from across the continent on Africa Live. Thanks for watching.
So this is it. I'm just about to be shot.
The tents here, bottles are being thrown as they do so.
There are about 3 critical bridges here in Malawi. That's one of them. We're going to cross that bridge.
As you can see behind me, police forces
who are replying with gas. Gas just came in.
Tear gas. So it's all begun now.
Divisions leading the charge into West Mosul have brought us here.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots.
This is where most of the fighting has been concentrated.
This is the front line now after 9 days of fighting.
We're about 2 to 3 kilometers from
within
the front
clear
line.
view of this front line position.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Major protests expected in Mali against ECOWAS sanctions. Burkina Faso announces 12 people in custody over plot to destabilize institutions. And a quiet evening in Tunisia's main cities as night curfew is reimposed. This is Africa Live. Hello and thank you for joining us. I'm Penina Karibe. Also coming up, the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat and its partners launched the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System. And in sports, upsets and surprises as Africa Cup of Nations marches enter the second round in Cameroon. The United Nations is urging Mali's ruling junta to announce an election timetable amid anger over its decision to delay elections. UN Chief Antonio Guterres says this could improve relations between Mali and the international community, in particular the West African bloc ECOWAS. In a sharp escalation after months of diplomatic tensions, ECOWAS last week agreed to shatter borders with the Sahel state and impose a trade embargo. The move came after Mali's junta proposed to stay in power for up to 5 years before staging elections. This is against international demands to respect a promise to hold elections on the 27th of February. EU defense ministers have also announced that they will be falling in line with the ECOWAS sanctions to pile more pressure on the Mali military leaders.
ECOWAS decision establishing that if Malian government presents an acceptable timeline and takes step in that direction, then there will be gradual lifting of sanctions. And of course, I'm working with ECOWAS and the African Union to create conditions which can allow the government of Mali to adopt a reasonable and acceptable position to accelerate a transition which has already been underway for a long time.
Right, let's get a wider perspective on this. From Paris, we have Ryan Thompson joining us live. Ryan, the EU says they will also slap sanctions on Mali, just like ECOWAS has done. How do we expect EU sanctions to impact the Mali military leadership?
Hi there. Well, the first thing to understand is France is now leading the European Defence Pact ever since they've taken on the EU Council presidency. These meetings of defence ministers will be held in France under the guidance of the French Foreign Minister, Jean-Yves Le Drian. Jean-Yves Le Drian called them all to a meeting in Brest in France on Thursday where they were able to come to an agreement alongside the EU European Commission High Commissioner on Foreign Policy, Josep Borrell, to really agree to these terms and the movement towards these sanctions. Le Drian outlining after the call that this is a European issue because it includes more than just a French military presence in Mali formally. I mean, there are nearly 1,000 German troops on the ground there as well. And the goal with these is to really suffocate leaders, to have them conform to the demands and the policies, what the European Union and France are asking for in terms of their previous commitments to upholding democratization in the country, but also seeing that they move towards this progression. The goal really is to cut off resources both financially and structurally. You heard about ECOWAS closing the borders so that they see a little bit of difficulty in terms of importing things. Air France, the flag carrier of France, cutting off their connection to Mali as well. No more flights going through effective as of today. And there will also be these financial and trade cuts, really cutting them off from the global financial system so that they cannot move money around as easy as they have been able to previously.
So France says Russian mercenaries from the Wagner company are increasing operations in Mali. How is France now protecting its interests in that country after drawing down its military operations there? And also, how do these EU sanctions factor into that matrix?
Yeah, it's been about 1 month since France has really drawn down its military presence there. Over the past 8 years, since the last French president was in office, there's been over 5,000 French troops on the ground there fighting this fight that they had really tried to push for in terms of democratization of Mali and moving them away from what they'd previously been at. These sanctions, according to Josep Borrell, the EU High Commissioner, are a response to the Wagner group's arrival as a way to suffocate the leaders of Mali from being able to pay for them, to support them, and to be able to engage in this game. They do also say that further sanctions are expected from the European side by the end of January. There will be ongoing discussions here in France, but also in Brussels, as these foreign and defense ministers try to come to some kind of consensus about what they can do on this situation.
All right, Ryan Thompson live for us in Paris. Thank you, Ryan, for that. Meanwhile, Sweden has announced its decision to withdraw its troops this year from a European Special Forces mission to the Sahel region in Mali. This was revealed by the Swedish foreign minister on the sidelines of an ongoing EU foreign ministers meeting in western France. Let's head to Burkina Faso now, where 12 people, including a senior army officer, are in custody over a plot to destabilize institutions. According to Armed Forces Minister, the 12 are among 15 people arrested since Monday after the plot was uncovered. Those arrested include 2 officers, 7 non-commissioned officers, a senior officer and 5 civilians. Of these, according to Zimbabwe, 2 civilians and a soldier have been released after giving preliminary testimony, leaving 12 in preventive detention. The minister says the arrests were ordered by prosecutors at a military tribunal in the capital, Ouagadougou. The West African country has a long history of coups. It's currently battling a militant insurgency that swept in from neighboring Mali in 2015.
The Ministry of the Armed Forces and Veterans presented an oral communication to the Council of Ministers to report on the referral to the Public Prosecutor's Office of the Ouagadougou Military Court, which led to the arrest of military personnel and civilians for allegedly attempting to destabilize the institutions of the state. This legal action, which was decided by the military prosecutor, follows report by a soldier who was allegedly contacted by a group of individuals to join the group in order to carry out destabilization actions against the institutions.
You're watching Africa Live. Let's take a short break. Straight ahead. A quiet evening in Tunisia's main cities as night curfew is reimposed.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Tunisia has reimposed night curfew and banned all gatherings for 2 weeks. Empty streets, closed shops and cafes characterized the capital Tunis Thursday night as police enforced the curfew. The government says the move is to counter the rapid spread of COVID-19. However, critics say the restriction is aimed at blocking expected protests against the president by major political parties. Adnet Shawashi has the details.
Tunisia's Scientific Committee to Combat COVID-19 announced that the decision to restore curfew was necessary. Experts say the health situation is alarming. It is characterized by the rapid spread of the Omicron variant in the country.
We took these measures because they were successful during the first waves of the pandemic. When nighttime curfew is respected and all public and private meetings and events are cancelled, we can break the chain of infections. Omicron spreads rapidly. We cannot control it without applying strict preventive measures.
For over 40 years, Munir has been working as a fabric trader in downtown Tunis. He says business owners have never experienced such a catastrophic situation following the successive lockdowns and curfews in the country.
The last 3 years were extremely hard due to the lockdowns. Now this new night curfew will devastate business activity and cause irreplaceable losses. We are fed up. Who is going to pay the salaries of hundreds of thousands of people who work at night? Will the state pay the bills of restaurants, bars and hotels? This will not happen. The country is paralyzed.
Several political parties slammed the government's decision. Opposition figures accused the authorities of banning public meetings to prevent tens of thousands of protesters from rallying over the next few days. On January 14th, Tunisia marks the 11th anniversary of its popular uprising.
The government's decision to impose a curfew and ban gatherings is purely political. It is using the health crisis as a pretext to confiscate the rights of Tunisians to protest freely. This proves against the deteriorating situation of liberties since President Kais Saied announced the exceptional measures last July.
Tunisia imposed a curfew during the first wave of the pandemic in 2020 and again for much of last year, but lifted it in September 2021 as cases dropped. The COVID-19 task force announced that its decisions are based on scientific data as well as the development of the health situation. More than 25,600 coronavirus-related deaths were recorded in the country since the outbreak of the pandemic in Tunisia in March 2020. Abdel Shawashi, CGTN, Tunis.
Conservationists in Rwanda are struggling to control a growing gorilla population following successful efforts to raise the number of animals in the Volcanoes National Park. Officials say they are now focused on expanding the park while working to reduce human-wildlife conflict. CGTN's Joy Kiruki has the story.
The Virunga Range expands across Rwanda, Uganda and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Along with Uganda's Bwindi Forest, it acts as the world's only habitat for mountain gorillas. The Volcanoes National Park in Rwanda boasts of accommodating hundreds of mountain gorillas. Despite this conservation triumph, the creatures are now fighting for space to grow and thrive.
In the past 50 years, the park lost 54% of the size of the park. And when all efforts were put in place for the mountain gorilla population to recover to the current numbers, the habitat has not changed.
We recorded 7 silverback deaths. So that's, again, a consequence of more groups ranging in the same area, really not expanding and going to the rest of the park, and that leading to more intergroup interactions and then more infanticides.
According to workers in the Rwandan park, the number of gorillas has risen from just 880 in 2010 to over 1,000 by 2015. This is after decades of poaching that has caused a plunge in the population.
We are aiming in the next 10 years to expand the park by 37 square kilometers, which correspond to 23% increase of the effective habitat of the park.
Stronger security measures to prevent human-wildlife conflict have sought to win over locals. Today, 10% of each park ticket is dedicated to community projects, while 5% is allocated to a compensation fund for villages. This has helped turn the gorillas' fortunes around, as they are now seen as key to the community's financial future. Joy Kiruki Juma, CGTN.
A growing number of women in Zimbabwe are breaking barriers to become tour guides and game rangers in a field that is largely dominated by men. The Zimbabwe Parks and Wildlife Authority is pushing for changes to end the underrepresentation and change the face of the industry. Farai Mokutoya reports.
Sarudzai Muzinde and Catherine Washaya begin another day at the Lake Chivero Game Park, where they show off the wildlife to visitors and stand guard over it.
Patrolling the wilderness at all hours of the day and night, it's obviously very hard work, but I'm sure there are things you love and enjoy about this job. What are some of the best parts of the work that you do?
One of the best that I can say I actually enjoy doing this work is that, first of all, there's something that I've always wanted. I've already admired people in the bush. I like this natural environment, the God-given, nothing added to it. And me as a woman, I enjoy being part of that, being in charge, making sure no one is taking anything from it. And try me, no one will take anything while I'm standing.
That reveals the intent with which authorities are looking after this priceless heritage. There's been a significant reduction in the numbers of wildlife lost to poachers here over the last few years. Zimbabwe's conservation effort has been so effective, it has started reintroducing some endangered species like black rhino into game parks where they had previously been completely wiped out. The National Parks and Wildlife Management Authority aims to consolidate the gains by making conservation more inclusive.
About 5 years ago, it was 90 versus 10 because most of our officers were male and it's a male-dominated industry. But over the last 3 years, we've increased the percentage of women to about 20 and we continue to do that.
Female enrollment in training schools has increased to 40% as the authority encourages more young women to take up a job where emotions are stretched to extremes.
It's exciting to teach people who may be ignorant about our wildlife to know more. It's dangerous, especially when encountering armed poachers, because it's your life or theirs. It's also painful when an animal dies. It feels like losing a child that I was taking care of.
She hopes the losses are minimized as more women sign up for duty. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Lake Chivero, Zimbabwe.
A Chinese-Egyptian manufacturing agreement is seeing Chinese bicycles produced domestically in Egypt. 2 models are being produced by the government's manufacturing arm. The partnership is driving a government initiative to promote sports and healthy lifestyles among Egyptians. More with CGTN's Adel Mahri.
A partnership between Egypt and China is seeing Chinese bicycles getting assembled locally. The government's industrial arm, the Arab Organization for Industrialization, is leading the project to produce 2 bike models, a mountain bike and a hybrid city model. Egypt says it is pursuing an ambitious plan to produce a bike for every citizen, starting with a target of 1 million bicycles.
We import all the bicycle components from China and fully assemble them here in the factory's production line. That will continue until we manufacture them domestically. The bikes come with advanced features. The mountain bike, for instance, has suspensions that can be adjusted based on the nature of the terrain.
The bikes are offered at subsidized prices, at least 30% less than the local market. Only the sports ministry sells them through its website. It costs from $120 to $150 for an adult-sized bike. To encourage Egyptians to buy, the public can get a payment facility of up to 12 months with 0 interest fees.
This is one of the most important national initiatives which the Youth and Sports Ministry is leading. It provides a very important service for the youth of Egypt. The initiative is under the auspices of the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. It doesn't only provide bikes for the public, it is part of a bigger campaign to promote stronger immunity and health by practicing sports.
Since he took office, Egyptian President Sisi has been promoting bicycles. On many occasions, he appeared in different Egyptian cities practicing his favorite sport. Since then, the government has been working to encourage the public to bike. Hoping to decrease traffic and promote the eco-friendly means of transportation, Cairo has been creating bike lanes and bike stops at prime locations in downtown areas. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
This is Africa Live. Coming up in business news. The African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat and its partners launched the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System. And investors worried that Ghana may be unable to service its debt if it continues borrowing.
Africa is a continent of diversity. with varied climates and enchanting geography. And a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg,
Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. You've got to get out, go there, and you'll find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca. Among the crowds in Cairo.
Who come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt.
Along the waters of the Nile. Along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
The African Continental Free Trade Area, in partnership with the African Export-Import Bank, has launched a Pan-African payment and settlement system. The PAP system hopes to centralize payment for intra-African trade and formalize some unrecorded trade across borders. The move is expected to boost trade and end reliance on third-party currencies to pay for transactions. The newly launched system acts as an alternative to current high-cost banking by providing a low-cost and risk-controlled platform. Consumers and traders are able to make payments using their local currencies. Its commercial launch in Ghana on Thursday came after successful pilot programs in 6 West African nations. AfCFTA Secretary General Wamkele Mene says the payment system is expected to save the continent up to $5 billion annually. It may be tough times ahead for Ghana's debt market. Investors are now questioning whether the region's second biggest economy can sustain its debt levels, especially if a surge in borrowing costs shuts it out of international markets. The West African nation's dollar bonds have slumped 10% in 10 days, moving deeper into distressed territory. Its $27 billion of foreign debt had the worst start to the year among emerging markets, extending last year's 14% loss. Analysts are skeptical that refinancing debt in the Eurobond market will be an option when the U.S. Federal Reserve hikes rates. Also, its budget targets remain elusive. Government debt climbed to 81.5% of the GDP at the end of last year from 31.4% a decade ago. Analysts don't expect the country to default in 2022, but medium to longer term, this may become an issue as Ghana has too much debt for the size of its economy. Oil exploration giant Royal Dutch Shell is in talks with about 5 local oil and gas companies in Nigeria to divest its stakes in onshore oil fields in the country's oil-rich Niger Delta region. The sale could fetch the oil giant up to $3 billion. The company has been active in the region since the 1930s, but is currently on a global drive to reduce its carbon emissions. Here's CGTN's Deji Badimosi with more on that story.
The planned divestment by Shell does not come as a surprise to players in Nigeria's oil and gas industry. It's been in the works for some years now, and for many, it creates an opportunity for local companies to step in and increase their stake in the country's oil and gas industry. The Nigerian government, which runs a joint venture with Shell, has played down concerns over the planned divestment.
It's a business model for Shell. Whenever they operate in territories, after a while, they divest from certain areas, especially when they see that local competence has grown. And in Nigeria today, the local competence has grown, as you agree. And that's why Shell wants to divest only in the onshore and the shallow waters. They are still in the country in the deep waters.
Some industry experts, though, think otherwise. Shell has stakes in 19 oil mining leases in Nigeria's onshore oil and gas joint venture. While it holds a 30% stake in the venture, the Nigerian government holds a 55% stake, while Total Energies and ENI hold 10% and 5% stakes respectively.
As far as I'm concerned, the divestment by Shell is not because locals have come of age. We already have local companies, or what we technically call indigenous companies, contributing their quotas. Shell is technically running away from business climate hostilities.
You may say that divestment will throw in opportunity for indigenous companies, but at the same time, it's sending signals to the international community that Nigeria is not a safe place to do investment. So government has been trying to counter this kind of campaign, so that is the basic problem. Overall, Nigeria economy will bear some of this, the brunt of the divestment.
Beyond its global plan to cut down on its carbon emissions, Shell has been facing several challenges with its onshore operations in Nigeria. It's since shifted focus to deep offshore operations, seeking to dispose its onshore assets.
Many issues are now being raised concerning the divestment. First of all, the indigenous companies that are interested in the divestment in the oil fields are currently engaged in negotiation with Shell. But there are some other issues that are coming up that people, observers and experts are raising for those who are interested, particularly the issue of abandonment and the commissioning of some of the oil and gas assets in those areas, which of course may prove very serious for whoever will be taking on this asset.
5 independent Nigerian oil and gas companies have shown interest in the assets and are in talks with Shell. The bidding process is expected to be opened by the end of this month. DG Bademasi, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Still in Nigeria, startups in the country are helping fight counterfeit pharmaceutical drugs in Africa's most populous nation. The prevalence rate of fake drugs in the country is higher than the global average and contributes to the deaths of thousands of children and adults annually. CGTN's Beryl Oro has that story.
The prevalence rate of fake drugs in Nigeria is higher than the global average of 10%. So to fight the flood of fake pills, the National Agency for Food and Drug Administration and Control, in partnership with some startups, has created stickers with unique codes attached to boxes and sachets of pills. And consumers can then use apps on their phones to scan the code and confirm their authenticity.
The major problem of counterfeits in Nigeria and Africa is as a result of broken supply chain processes. Right, you have several importers having the same license to import the same product. It's very difficult, and then you probably now have different barcode numbers for the same products, but probably the product is in different packaging.
In 2009, Biofem Industries discovered a counterfeit of their anti-diabetic prescription drug in the market, which caused a decline in their revenue. They began using the unstructured supplementary service data technology in 2011.
After the experience we had, and we were able to mitigate that experience using the technology, we decided that all our products was going to have it, so that we do not wait till when it is counterfeited before we protect the patient, which is primary to us.
Lagos-based Checkit Technologies and Sproxil Africa have empowered patients to check authenticity, and manufacturers are also able to see the number of new customers who have used their products.
What we discovered was that people don't necessarily scratch off labels on products, which is why we went off with the idea of, putting more like an incentive on the sticker labels through a scratch verify win model, printing that exactly on the sticker label. So when the consumer sees the sticker label, over 60% of our labels get authenticated in the market.
The idea was, why don't you put the power in the hand of the product end user
to be able to validate what he or she is buying at the point of purchase. So with that, first they note the shop where they bought it, and they can tell their family members, and no shop owner wants to be tagged as someone who sells counterfeit product.
Both Checkit and Proxil offer services in various countries in Africa and are working to build in marketing tools to boost authentication of products.
That has boosted the confidence of people in this. So modern technologies have really helped. So, but for that, people would go and imagine some of the drugs in time past that people will ingest without that technology. So the technology has really helped.
Nigeria, with a population of 200 million, has had fake and substandard pharmaceuticals influx in its market for decades. The national agency has, in the past 3 years, seized $4.8 billion worth of counterfeit drugs. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
Egypt is in the midst of a major overhaul of its current railway sector to fit a new eco-friendly network. A budget of $46 billion has been allocated for the first 10-year phase that ends in 2024, compared to only $2.6 billion that was spent in more than 3 decades between 1980 to 2013. CGTN's Yasser Hakim spoke with the chairman of Egypt's National Authority for Tunnels on the development of the electric railway projects, as well as China's role in the process.
بننفذ حاليا 3 خطوط مترو أنفاق.
We are currently constructing 3 underground metro lines, namely the 3rd, 4th and 6th lines. We are constructing the light rail transit line to connect Cairo to the eastern suburbs and the administrative capital, and which will be inaugurated soon. And there are 2 monorail lines in the 6th of October city in the west that will connect Cairo to the east with the new administrative capital.
We want to get more details about the light rail transit and all the information about how the project is being done, when it will be ready, and the number of passengers, for example, that will be using it, and the cost of the project.
Light rail transit.
The light rail train will be introduced for the first time in Egypt. It's being done in cooperation with China, which is our partner in our smart transport strategy, and covers 108 kilometers. The light train connects to the metro lines to link the eastern cities of Greater Cairo and the administrative capital, and also connects with the high-speed train to reach the north of the country in Alexandria, the north coast and Alamein city. The light rail has 22 carriages in the first phase and will carry 45 to 55,000 passengers on each direction every trip.
What is the benefit of these projects for the economy in Egypt and for the Egyptian citizens?
Any projects established by the state are aimed at having a positive impact on the citizens. First, we'll be increasing speed because time is money, so we are investing in time. Secondly, we are transforming from the traditional fuel-run engines to eco-friendly electric transport vehicles. This will save on the fuel cost, has a positive impact on the environment and the health of the passengers. The trains will transport larger numbers of people faster, therefore they will not need the traditional transportation or cars, which reduces pollution, relieves the burden off roads and traffic, and economically benefits Egyptians. It will also operate as a freight transport line. The current traditional trains transport goods at a speed of 30 to 40 kilometers per hour. The high-speed train will transport at a speed of 120 kilometers per hour.
China is working with Egypt on a couple of these projects. Tell us more about your cooperation with China.
The 2 countries have a long history and cooperation in many fields. In my sector, it's the electric rail transport. We have close relations as China is successfully contributing in the funding and construction of the projects. The Chinese companies are working hand in hand with local developers to build the network. China is also providing us with the train carriages, and a large portion of the financing is from China. Everything is going as planned and has proved a successful cooperation.
Thank you very much for joining us here on CGTN.
You're watching Africa Live. Coming up in sports. Upsets and surprises as Africa Cup of Nations matches enter the second round.